Live.
Yeah. Right. Okay. It says it's streaming on Facebook, so let's just see. If anyone's watching and this is actually working, then welcome to the Academy live stream. We're trying to see whether or not this is a more efficient way of broadcasting rather than recording it and then showing it to make meetings more live and interactive, hopefully, moving forward. This is the experiment anyway. So, oh, okay, cool. Well, that's something. I can see a video on someone else's device. That's great news. So today we are going to be discussing a subject which we've entitled, Is Our Culture of Obedience Creating a Culture of Dissonance? And I'll tell you how we came about this topic in a second, but the first thing I'd like to do is start with a definition of what that could even mean. By obedience, what we're talking about here is the conformity to particular norms or a subservience to a particular set of mandated rules. By dissonance, we mean a disharmony, a misalignment, or even a kind of an unresonant link with something. So if we say that is our culture of obedience creating a culture of dissonance, one could argue that we are increasingly over time obedient to certain legislations or restrictions or guidance that we question less as time goes on. For instance, in the United Kingdom, in primary school, you are essentially moved towards the Tudors at a time of history that is seen as the most relevant to us. We will not be talking about the ancient Indus Valley or the Sanskrit Vedic texts of thousands of years BC. In fact, in those times where there was no such thing as even the concept of a god, there was an internalized belief system of the power of humanity that didn't require externalized control mechanisms. Of course, that would be extraordinarily dangerous to teach. It'd be far better to know the wives' names of Henry VIII, because that has some form of academic qualification that brings you enabled to live more. Excuse my cynicism. So we have, as we go through time, increasing demands on us to not necessarily ask why. And without moving this into any form of modern day context, specifically around any pandemics that may be going on, we are told that we must do X, whether it's wear a particular device or whether it's to put a particular needle in our arm, and therefore we do it. Why? Because we assume that is what we are meant to do, to be law-abiding citizens, and we assume by that the law is absolutely in our best interests. Government is to look after the benefit of society. Citizens are citizens, so changeable entities within a city, a combined circumstance that the government is there to protect. Now, many of us might question whether or not that's the case, but what this talk is about is whether this obedience that I posit is increasingly bringing about a culture of dissonance, i.e. more people finding less harmony with what they are in their surroundings of, questioning more and therefore feeling slightly more unstable in their circumstance. I pay my tax, therefore I get this. I'm a law-abiding citizen, therefore I get certain benefits. I know that I'm told the truth, and therefore I can rely on these things. And anyone who voted for Brexit, who's now worried about whether or not taxes are rising, should absolutely see the line between their actions and the outcomes. So I've been thinking about this for a while. I'm sure everyone on this call may have as well. And then Prashant said in our group chat that he had a particular experience, and he raised whether or not the experience that he had was actually could be extrapolated or conflated to a wider circumstance. So Prashant, over to you. What was the experience you had, and how did that then arrive at the conflation in your head?
Well, I mean, I think what happened was I was just walking down the street, minding my own business, and I heard this voice behind me asking why I was walking in front of him. To which my response was, because I don't have eyes at the back of my head, or a simple "excuse me" would do, or that kind of any sort of response. But this was someone who had earphones on, and was just had to almost, it was essentially just reacting to what was in front of him. And I mean, it just taught me about how essentially mechanical people are today. There's no imagination that something there are many possibilities here when people just react to things. And I mean, that's one of the things I came away with. And
the mechanical lack of imagination, and obviously when we say there is no, we're intentionally hyperbolic here to expand it so that it's discursive. But do you feel that people were more imaginative, less mechanical, and potentially less jumpy or less angry in the past?
Well, I think there's a variable in today's life that you have to consider: technology and noise. Technology has amplified the noise in people's to an extent where I feel that this is well, metaphor for that is Tinder, just complete an app for impersonal hookups or that sort of thing. So that's a metaphor for our times, literally. So there's a kind of, I mean, an absence of the humanistic spirit. I think it's sort of reached the zenith. I think people used to be, even in a small situation like this, people would be aware. People would say, "Excuse me," or at least they'd be aware enough to rudely push you out. But this was just some sort of bland, I don't know, zombie, like kind of, I don't know. Yeah. It's hard. It struck me as a unique. I think we are in a pretty unique paradigm because of technology and the way it's amplified noise.
Well, and anyone who's watching who's seen my TED Portugal talk from 2013 will know, as I've said many times, the opening line is, throughout history, the best way of controlling civilizations is to limit the amount of information they have access to. I then go on to speak about how we've become increasingly addicted to noise. In fact, at one stage I say that we are so obsessed with throwing birds at pigs that we are at risk of having our hearts held hostage by Grand Theft Auto. And one of my most inspired off the cuff statements of all time that's now hung around my head for 8 years since. So I'm going to hand over to Richard first. When you hear this précis by Prashant to be alliterative, I'm wondering whether there is is there another angle that you observe here? Can you see that our zombie-like addiction to noise via technology has dumbed us into sleepwalking ourselves into a future that we wouldn't necessarily want? And do you then see that conflated to a cultural change, or what's your view?
Yeah, no, I remember Prashant's comment, and I can remember lots of experiences like that. I'm 6'2", you can't miss me. I'm never going to be standing in your way on purpose or blocking a path in a queue. But I don't have eyes in the back of my head, so all you got to do is say, "Oh, excuse me, can I get past?" I would do that, but I make a point of it. I make a point of saying, I am here. I am another human being. I don't want your life story, but I will engage with you if it's just to say, "Pass," let me pass by. So I think what it is, and the same with cyclists who don't like ringing their bells if they're coming up behind you. I mean, that is the purpose of the bell, but maybe it's a British thing. They just feel a bit guilty ringing the bell, So I think what it is, so that the zombie that came up behind Prashant, maybe he had his headphones on and he was in his world. He wasn't connected to Prashant at that moment because he was in his own little bubble, connected via his headphones and probably, his little safe planet on the internet or wherever it was, and his chat rooms or whatever. And so he was bringing with him, he had his world with him. And in the way was this tiny little thing, Prashant, just another little ant in the way of this guy's massive world, which in his head was surging towards down the road. And, of course you must be able to see me because I am the whole planet. You know, it's this sort of attitude of, you know, I've got rights and you better, you know, let me have them. But you know, they don't fulfill their responsibilities.
It's a great point, actually, and I feel that there is a sense of entitlement that may not necessarily have been there in the past.
Yes,
I'm you know, Prashant and I think he and I are probably the most similar in terms of what age we think we probably would have flourished most in, and it sure as hell isn't within the 2,000 years of past God times. So, Martin, just before I'll hand back to you, Prashant, in a second. Martin, over to you to give your initial take on this.
Well, my initial take is that going from Prashant's vignette of a story, that the thing that strikes me firstly is, have we stopped being able to formulate questions properly to ourselves? So can I question myself and where I am in this scene if I'm the person behind Prashant? Can I question myself and my sense of entitlement, as Richard brought up as well, so that I don't rush in there with, you're in my way, why are you in my way? You know, I mean, it's a direct question, which is good, but it's not really a question. You haven't questioned what's going on here, because somebody being in front of you, they may not be aware that you're there. So in this case, Prashant wasn't aware. So you haven't questioned what's actually happening in the scene.
Do you find that that's in your head? Do you see this as a lack of critical thinking that's commonplace, or self-questioning or observation of a circumstance that has happened over time, maybe due to, and I'm going to stretch it here to conflate it slightly, to reliance tools providing us answers? We don't need to really think. If I can actually double click this and it comes up with the answer. I mean, I know very well how to drive from here to the gym, but my sat nav kind of seems to be the easiest way to do it. Could we say that this over-reliance on things that are easy has meant us not even ask the harder questions, such as, why am I here? What type of person would I like to be? How would I like to interact with others? Is my actions having any negative impact on the external world or the planet as a whole? Do we do if we haven't needed to?
Sorry, I missed that last part of the question there.
Well, do we ask these questions less because we don't necessarily need to do that anymore? We don't need to ask awkward questions.
I think that might be the case, that in a strange way, these technologies that allow us to just kind of outsource some of our thinking to Google or whatever it might be, does allow us to kind of almost divorce ourselves from having to think, and so it does become a critical thinking question for me, as to whether people in general are losing that faculty to be able to think of what's actually going on around me, what is actually happening here, and so our awareness of where we are and what we do and how we relate to other people are all missing. And also, I think there's an element within that as well, that we are now hopefully at a zenith of this kind of cult of the individual, and we'll come back off the other side of that at some point, to realize that actually we're part of a whole, and you know, this whole is home to all of us, and we need to kind of figure a way of seeing ourselves more in that setting.
Yeah, well said. Okay, Prashant, over to you, and then I'll go to you, Richard. Prashant, what's your take?
Well, I mean, it's I think what I can say is that this generation that's been born into technology where, you know, they've never had, you know, I've had every sort of phone in my life, rotary phone, the cordless phone, you know, all the way down to modern forms of communications, you know, and I remember a time when, you know, you're between places and you didn't need to know who was getting in touch with you. And, you know, information wasn't necessarily stalking you around, nor was your information flying about for others to see. And I think to an extent, it's been a bombardment of all this. I think this bombardment of information has essentially killed, I think, the collective internal landscapes of individual and collective internal landscapes of people. I mean, apart from all this, you know, or, you know, apart from not being able to formulate enough, not formulate a simple question in your mind, like, you know, oh, how do I get this person is ahead of me? I should probably, how many people can probably enjoy Simple Melody by Bach or something like that, and, you know, and kind of just take it in, be in that moment and all that kind of thing. So I think this goes on at many levels. I think it's the sort of erosion of the humanistic spirit, to an extent, is how I feel it.
Yeah, Richard, what's your take on that, Rich?
Yeah, exactly. I'm thinking lots of different things here, but I'm thinking, you know, we talk about search. We've got the phone and we can do a search. Okay, we can find anything we want. but you know, we've discussed this before. But really, the search is only as good as the question you ask it, and which is limited by your intelligence. So, yeah, we're probably losing our ability to ask the right questions. You know, the world would be great if it was more about the discovery. So, you know, these clever systems are reading all the information, all the noise, and making sense of it for us and telling us this is the pattern, this is what's going on, this is what you should do. And maybe that's, you know, moving from search to discovery. So it then tells us what the questions are, so we don't have to ask them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So it's like search. And the other thing is, going back to the people on the pavement thing, I have these weird thoughts. So if I'm walking along the pavement and there's 3 people coming towards me, my brain is thinking, right, what's going to happen here? Because most people don't get into single file. And I'm thinking, well, I'm one unit, that group of 3 are another unit. Therefore, we have 50% each of the pavement. We need to pass each other in a fair way. It kind of speaks to my values. It's like fairness. Whereas actually most people will think, well, there's 3 of us, one of him. He can have 25% of the space on the pavement or something. It's like a, I don't know. It's like it just makes you think. I probably overthink about things, but yeah, that's my thinking. But I think the technology is it's probably dumbing us down because it's giving us too much information, perhaps, and we can't filter it.
I think you've raised something as a lateral point there, which I need to address, and I haven't really done so on any of these Academy chats, which is whether or not we overthink. The criticism that I face the most is whether I'm overthinking something, and I hereby would like to answer that categorically. I don't believe there is such a thing as overthinking. What there is unconscious thinking, which essentially happens to us, by us, in our heuristics and biases that control us without us being conscious of what that thinking is. So I don't believe we can over or underthink. I think we can consciously or unconsciously think. And the point is to unlock what I would call advanced thought, which is almost a misnomer because it's not really advancing anything other than being more conscious as to how we think, is extremely important. So anyway, I had to say that because I've never said it on one of these things because it's just, and I haven't even really, I've written an entire book arguing that point recently. Of course. But anyway, so I think back to Prashant's point. I've recently watched the first 2 episodes of something on Amazon Prime called Solos, and Solos is 1 actor per episode. And using clever technology, sometimes that 1 actor can play 3 actors in the scene. And Anne Hathaway is in episode 1. And the whole thing, spoiler alert, is that she is a physicist who's attempting to time travel. And it turns out that why she's attempting to time travel is because her mum is sick and she wants to go into the future and find a cure and then come back to the past and so on. And what isn't said in the entire brilliant 25 minutes episode of episode 1 of Solos, what isn't said at any stage, other than once one character, which is her in the future, says to her, you just need to be here now.
Yeah. Be
here now. Stop trying to be there and back there. And then they move swiftly on to something more dramatic than what I see as the fundamental truth of civilization. But it's a shame because they could have equally made this into a very big, very powerful statement.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that people watch it and get the point, which is there is actually a degradation of life itself if we time travel, metaphorically or literally, and escape the present. Before I move to Martin, Prashant, I need to hand over to you for a comment on that.
Oh, well, I mean, obviously, yes, we do. I mean, I think the mind is sort of, I mean, that's one of the other after effects of technology, that the mind is essentially stretched in all kinds of direction, and you're never really here now. Even within the present, we don't know how to be here now. I think there's a sort of complete dissociation from the moment, even when we're in it.
Yes, and I must admit, last night I realized something, a truth in preparation for this conversation, that oftentimes there's been things in life where I've thought, wow, the circumstance I am now in, I couldn't have imagined this 6 months ago. Wow. Yeah. Who could have thought 6 months ago I'd be here? And I reckon all of us could relate to that. But if we can all relate to that, then could we not also have a childlike optimism? Not a hope or an expectation, but a childlike optimism and think it's extremely likely that in some months' time, I will look back at now and go, I couldn't have imagined this outcome. How fascinating is that? I will be in situations that I can't even fathom right now. How awesome. So what I'm going to do now is enjoy this moment as much as I can and be consciously aware of the fact that anything can happen, and be okay with that. And it hit me like a thunderbolt, even though the second to last book, theoretically Powered by Change, is about that. I've now realized that, and I think it's something that we like enthusiasm for 3 months, 6 months, 10 months, 12, but tomorrow, something could happen today that fundamentally changed my life for the better. Some people could think something could happen today that fundamentally changed your life for the worse. And to that, I would say that there is no such thing as better or worse. Things are things. How we apportion feelings to them is a choice.
Yeah.
Viktor Frankl.
Yeah.
Martin, I'm going to hand over to you, mate. What's your take?
Well, my take on all this is it's kind of going back to that question thing, really. And there's commonalities throughout everything that we've said so far. When we do question ourselves, I think or question anything really, we are looking for the quickest, simplest answer. This is why we always reach for technology in our pockets and so on. And we've tried to short circuit the process of actually coming up with an answer, or coming up with a myriad of answers, so that we have a number of different routes to go down. We're trying to short circuit that, so we have one route and we have one answer, and we don't even consider any of the other possibilities anymore. And I think losing that element of process has meant that we've lost an awful lot of our critical faculties.
Yeah, I fear the same. And so moving to a solutions approach of this, what would you, Martin, say we can do individually or collectively about it?
I think the big thing is that one of the things we can really look at is that there's a kind of a plurality in virtually everything. There's a plurality in the number of ways we can look at a question, the number of questions we can ask ourselves about a specific situational subject. And when we find that right question to actually ask, then and only then are we going to even be able to come up with the right solution, the right answer to anything. So if I'm walking down the street behind Prashant, the right question isn't, why is this guy in front of me? It's really annoying me. The right question is, where do I need to be? And how do I get there without causing mayhem, essentially? So, we need to be able to figure out that actually there's a number of questions we can ask ourselves, and there's a number of answers to each of those questions that we can start to investigate and figure out if we're on the right path.
Yeah, Richard, why would you say that we don't do this more? We often arrive in conversations where it would appear that it's not tremendously complex what we're talking. There is the anti-time travel argument, or the invalidation of needing to live our lives in, or a greed of wanting to live in the past again, or vice versa. Why is it so complicated for us to solve these things when we kind of seem to know what the answers actually are?
Yeah, it's interesting because the most advanced states of thinking, which we'd probably call flow, when they say, it's 1,000 times more productive in terms of your productivity, is when they look at the brain is actually thinking less. So it's not using more of the brain, it's using less of the brain. So flow, all the studies they look at, it's literally switching bits off. So you block out the procrastination or the fear and all that sort of stuff, and just get on with stuff. And therefore you don't need 10,000 hours. Now, I'm obviously, with my book, with the Stratnev thing, I'm intrigued by this idea of the time, and it comes from your work. And so look, there's no such thing as the past or the future. There's only the now, isn't there? So we must enjoy the now. So therefore, we need that awareness. So walking down the pavement, thinking, right, what is the situation I'm in? As Martin just said. So what is the situation I'm in right now? How will I build, as the work of Lisa Feldman Barrett, how will I build the emotion right now, or the thought or the reaction to behave in a certain way? Because our brains are prediction machines. We're not, crazy lizards. So all that's going on, the prediction's going on, we're analyzing, we've got awareness. But I think the trick is that we need to just do that really, really quickly, like really fast. So we are not thinking. So we've got to go back, instead of being triggered and reacting to stuff, we go back and say, how do we build our thoughts and emotions and reactions? And how do we recode ourselves so that when those situations arrive, maybe we put some values in there, like, freedom of equality of space. We're all on this planet together. Therefore, I must find a solution for Prashant being in front of me without sort of knocking him over or something. So, but I think we've got to do it really fast. And so I call that 24/7 mindfulness. So we must think like a genius instantly without thinking about it, come up with the right answers. And that ties in with your work on, we don't want to fail fast. We want to learn fast. And if we learn fast, we sort of become like that quantum mind where, the quantum computer solves a puzzle instantly. So in a sense, we become the quantum thinker, and we get it right, and we do the right thing, to quote old Peter Drucker. So we're constantly, again, your work on perpetual change and adapting to that. We just get things right all the time because we programmed ourselves to think, behave, emote in the right way. And therefore, we get to results quicker. And that's the time machine thing. So we're not trying to escape the now. We're just moving to a series of nows very, very quickly, which we might call moving to the future.
So there's this is an interesting point that you've raised here, all three of you actually. That I'm a big Ram Dass fan, and in his book Be Here Now, that has been an inspiration to many people, and even songwriters from George Harrison through to Noel Gallagher and so forth. But there's two that I've never fessed up about this before, but I've a point of contention with Ram Dass, and I've spent years trying to reconcile it in my head, and I've now arrived at, well, the Rise of Advanced Thought book is basically my answer to Be Here Now. And my point of contention to Ram Dass is this. Inside Be Here Now, he says, it's only when caterpillarness is done that one becomes a butterfly. And this, again, is part of the paradox. You can't rip away caterpillarness. The whole trip occurs in an unfolding process of which we have no control. Now, that's a quote from Be Here Now that I'm have a challenge with, because I believe we are in charge of our perception of caterpillarness and the journey of caterpillarness to becoming a butterfly. I don't believe that we have absolutely no control, because we do have control over how we think, therefore perceive reality, therefore can control our perception of reality, of whether we are inside this perpetual caterpillarness. That's the first kind of slight, well, it's a significant got to in his thinking, and where I have arrived at personally, just for my own personal sake. But then he also speaks, the second kind of point of contention is his version, his mentioning of what he calls the cosmic humor. And the cosmic humor is this. The cosmic humor is, if you desire to move mountains and you continue to purify yourself, ultimately you'll arrive at a place where you are able to move mountains. But in order to arrive at the position of power, you'll have to give up being he who wanted to move mountains, so that you can be he who put the mountain there in the first place. So the cosmic humor is that when you have the power to move the mountain, you are absolutely the person who placed it there. So there the mountain stays. Okay. Now this has done my head in for decades. And, and where I've got to in that, hence the book, is that we can even control that paradox. We can control that paradox by giving up part of it if we so wish. We can adopt other parts. My wife often says to me, that I'm this primary manifestor, that I can manifest anything that I put my mind to, and she's right. But that's no superpower. It's a choice. And the choice is whether or not I believe that the outcome is possible. And I do. Other than breathing underwater without aid or flying without wings, I believe that every other scenario is demonstrably executable. All of it, including our perception of the cosmic paradox, or this system we're in. So I'm now going to go to Richard, Prashant, and Martin. From everything I've said and the Ram Dass quotes perhaps adding to this conversation, where do you sit on whether we are, well, actually, no, what resonated from what I've just said in your perception?
Yes, I'm thinking about the mountain. I'm thinking, well, what, if I want to move the mountain, why does it mean that I created the mountain in the first place? And then I suddenly thought, well, no, in real life, that would mean if I want to change my future, then I must accept that I created my present. Is that, would you say it's the same thing? And therefore, so what it means is, everything you've said really means that we actually have, if we look at brain science and spirituality, karma, whatever you want to call it, we have 100% control over everything, all right? So the brain is in our skull. There's no magic going on in the universe, okay? We are just a neuroscience and physiology. And so therefore we do have 100% control over everything, I suggest. And, but because we're human, we don't really want to know that, because that means we can't blame, so we say, God or karma or some external thing. So by admitting that, it means we've got to take responsibility, and therefore we'd have to blame ourselves for the shit we're in or something. So
quite right.
Yeah,
quite right. Accountability. I mean,
we don't want to be accountable for our lives.
No. And I'm wondering whether that's a point of resonance here. That if we choose accountability, then we, I as to quote another part of Ram Dass, Be Here Now, direct quote. This one I won't need to paraphrase because I actually know it off by heart. He says, "I think the message here is that you don't have to go anywhere else to find what you're seeking."
Yeah, because I have friends of mine who say, oh, do you know what, got a terrible life. I just want to go to India for 3 months and find myself. And I say, stop. Right, take a deep breath, look down. What can you see? There you are. You don't need to go anywhere. It's like, and if you get all those things right in your brain, you, like you say, you can create anything you want. Now I wrote about it in my work as if, in theory, if you took it to the extreme, you could get anything you wanted instantly. And that's the sort of time machine thing. But yeah, obviously it's not, you can't learn Mandarin in a 5 seconds, so.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, and Prashant, what's your take?
I mean, I think when you talked about moving the mountains, immediately the thought that came to me is that the role that the ego plays in placing the mountain and the obstacle in your path in the first place, and that essentially overcoming your ego and the poison that it feeds in your head, either in the form of your fears or in terms of your hatred or whatever. If you overcome all that, suddenly you get clarity, and that's how you. I mean, but then. And then I think also out of the ego is born the desire to move the mountain. So that's the other paradox. So if you overcome the ego, the desire to move it won't be there that much because the mountain won't be there. So yeah, so that's the sort of, that was my stream of consciousness working.
Me too, actually. I feel that's my job. That's my diving board off that. But I look at Be Here Now as a total piece in the same way as I do Man's Search for Meaning, both of which had a fundamental impact on my life. And I think that I wonder how we got to the situation of wanting to move a mountain in the first place. How we, in one of Ram Dass's other quotes, he says that good speech is silver, but silence is pure gold, right? He's actually quoting The Way of the Pilgrim. But I wonder why we need to speak then. So I go down this rabbit hole of saying, what's the point of us having these conversations? Personally, I think I'm learning from these conversations from other perspectives. I'm hoping that other people are learning from other perspectives by watching it. But ultimately, if we were all silent and present, then we wouldn't even need to have these conversations. Thus, are we perpetuating the noise by using technology to broadcast noise? And then I end up just going around. I sometimes spend 5 or 10 hours a day thinking about that one question. Yes.
But I mean, noise isn't just sound. Noise is something more, because a beautiful piece of music isn't noise. So noise is something that goes beyond sound. So in that case, this would qualify as noise. Yes,
I believe that noise is the antithesis of signal. So the way I see it is that it sits as a bedfellow, an angry bedfellow, a divorcee, in fact, of signal that is pure and to us resonant, individualized. Signal is thus to us individualized as an antithesis of signal. That's my view of where noise sits. And of course, these technologies around us do two ends of a spectrum. One is they propagate noise, and in other words, dissonance to us. And the other is it enables us to get medical help really fast. It enables us to be able to speak to our children when they're 15,000 miles away. Those things that technology does, in the same way as since the dawn of innovation, fire on demand, we have this paradox. We can either burn ourselves accidentally to death, or we can heat the food so it's easier to digest. So you can use these innovations to the extremes. And I'm feeling that cryptocurrency is at where fire on demand started now as well. We now have coins with pictures of dogs on that are worth $1 trillion, and we're trading NFTs for $3 million online, where you get this pixelated JPEG and everyone goes, oh my God, this is the next big thing. In the same way as when fire on demand, it's like, well, let's set light to everything. We'll burn everything, burn each other. And that's where we are until we can contain it and realize its true utility without danger. Martin, over to you. What's your take on this?
My take on it is much of it is contextual, and we've forgotten context in a majority of this. So when it comes to how our ego behaves, it would behave a lot better if we understood the context and remembered the context, and we're able to question ourselves and place ourselves in a scene of where we are at any one point, so that we do have a greater understanding of the big picture of what's going on around us. So we aren't thinking along these lines of everything that's in my head is what's real, because the majority of the time it's not, because especially the stuff that's going on in my head.
So let's finish off by talking about reality and perception. So we know that the way that reality really works is we have an internal story, and we then look at things. We're actually always time delayed. Actually, we don't even see things in real time. Stuff comes in through the ocular nerve. It hits our perceptors, receptors. And then what we do is we cross-match what we see with what we believe. And that internal story cross-section then produces our thoughts that come from the correlation between what we believe and what we've seen. Thus, reality is purely, we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. That's scientifically the truth. So in that, Martin, and then I'll go from Martin to Prashant to Richard on this one. If we accept the scientific reality of that what is real is purely an illusion that's created by ourselves through our historical story that we've created in our heads, could we be as bold as to say there is no such thing as reality?
I have no answer to that one. We could, I mean, it goes back to that whole cogito ergo sum thing, really.
Yeah,
that's the only thing we do know, is that I think, therefore I am. So
that's exactly I'm glad you arrived there, because that's exactly what I'm referring to.
So I think, from that point of view, we could say there is no such thing as reality.
Yeah, good. I'm glad we got there with 15 minutes left. That's a fun way of spending the rest of the evening, isn't it? For you guys, or in my case, the rest of the morning. Prashant, over to you. Is it the case that the only reality there is our thoughts, our version of inputs that we have around us, all of which is subjective, none of which is objective? Can we say something that grandiose and hyperbolic?
Well, I mean, if you have to get to absolute basics, you see a tree in front of you, you touch it, you find that it's wood, it's good. It's, so at some basic level, there are, basic objective facts, but that's not the level at which our mind works. Our mind forms associations, things we've read, things we've heard, songs we've heard, all that sort of stuff. And that's essentially, I think that's a crucial part of our mythos. I think, this objectification of reality, I think a lot of that, this attempt, I think, and especially I sort of come from what might be called a sort of pagan tradition. So in that sense, I don't think that's necessarily, I mean, that's quite, in my mindset, that's quite normal to my thinking, that, reality should have an element of diversity in it, and of plurality, rather than we should because I think the story that our mind creates of it is just as important as what it actually may be, if it is something. So I don't know.
Okay, let's talk about the tree part briefly before I hand over to Richard. So looking at it from a very scientific view, again, the tree is only seen as a tree because we believe that trees look like that, and wood is a substance because we believe that wood is that substance when we touch it from experience or being told.
Right.
The truth is, of course, that the tree is a collection of atoms that organize themselves based purely on observation.
Right.
Thus, the tree exists as a collection of atoms that are oscillating at that frequency because we're observing it to be a tree.
Right.
Would you still say that the tree is there when we're not there?
Yeah, no, that's a bit of a mind bender. But I mean, I think, but I think we are somewhat limited in that sense, in actually understanding the truth. There is probably an objective reality, but we're probably too limited to understand it.
There's a statement. I like that one. I mean, for me, I'm a fan of any statement that plays to the absolute human ignorance. I would back that. I would back the fact that we're too stupid to understand what's really going on. Yeah, that one I'll back. Yeah, I'll put chips on that one. Richard, over to you. What's your take on this?
Yeah. Oh, one of my favourite quotes I heard was, if a man in the forest is speaking in the forest and no woman is there to hear him, is he still wrong? Always makes me laugh. So yeah, I'm a big fan of David Eagleman at Stanford, and he said you get into his stuff on his Live Wire, where he says, we don't need eyes to see and ears to hear. We just need to get the signal into the brain somehow, because obviously it's in your skull. So all these things that we think of ourselves as being human, we don't actually need them really. But yeah, I think that in psychiatry it's called, personal construct theory. So we create a story about ourselves and we create a story about the world, and that's how we project.
That's right.
We're not looking at things coming in, we're projecting what's in ourselves already. So we are totally creating it inside. Yeah, and as you say about the arrangement of atoms, and therefore goes back to this idea, we therefore have total control over what we think and what our story is, and we can take the ownership.
Yeah. It's interesting. Sorry, Prashant, yes?
So, just another point. It's sort of like, when you look at how mind-bending reality really is, when you look up at the night sky, you see a bunch of stars that were there. What you're seeing is not the star as it is in the present. You're actually staring into the past. So that's another really mind-bending facet of reality that doesn't conform to, what we've been told is reality. So, you're talking about not being in the moment, but you can literally not be in the moment by staring up at the night sky.
Yeah, indeed. One of the things that I also is when we look at the patterns of the universe, number patterns, for instance, the Mandelbrot set is something that I'm a big fan of. My desktop is called the Buddha-Brot. I'll show you the Buddha-Brot, which is actually the organization of numbers, just from observation of the universe, that happen to organize themselves in this way. I'm just going to share my desktop, what I'm looking at the moment. I don't know if you can see my desktop.
Yeah. Oh
wow.
So this is purely numbers. This is not a design by an artist. This is how numbers in fractals organize themselves at 300 million iterations deep. Now, if you can recognize any image here, it's spookily similar to things that may have been several thousand years earlier than our intelligent thought. And yeah, I'm interested in how our ignorance of the universe is possibly actually the answers are so ever present, but we are so much in the way of ourselves because of what we would claim to be human intellect, that we have devolved over thousands and thousands and thousands of years to this illusion of being the master race, the apex predator.
Yeah.
Whereas in fact, we are maybe 10,000 years behind where we were 10,000 years ago.
And the irony is what you just showed there about the fractals, and that's highly mathematical and highly structured. And yet we call it chaos theory for some reason.
Yeah.
It's like, hang on a minute.
Yeah, in the same way as I still have arguments with scientists around whether or not quantum physics or quantum mechanics is a viable science based on its lack of understanding. As Niels Bohr said, if you have understood quantum mechanics, you haven't actually properly understood it yet. And so these are paradoxical situations where, and I believe that the split particle experiment is something that really has shown that. Yes, Prashant.
And the other thing is that our own definitions of chaos and order are based on our experiences, aren't they? Because what we recognize as chaos may not in an absolute sense be chaos. It might be in part of the natural order of the universe. So,
exactly right.
Yes.
And that goes to your point of saying that actually it's down to humans not being able to grasp that. Yeah. I mean, no one really, from Dr. Brian Cox, who's one of my favorite writers on it, through to any of the others around quantum mechanics. I mean, in his book, Everything That Can Happen Will Happen, that's a basic outline of quantum physics, but still still one cannot actually really, in a human capacity, easily grasp the fact that there is potentially a moment. There is no time. There is a moment, and this is all an observation of that moment in various different speeds, atomically rearranging itself based on our observation. What we know is that that's scientifically where we got to now, the best of our understanding. But as Thomas Kuhn says in the Paradox of Scientific Revolutions, we move from one understanding point and then trash it and then move to another understanding point, which is why Newtonians hate the quantum field of Einstein, because it kind of, where we had Newtonians saying, well, an apple falls, therefore gravity exists. And then we look at chaos theory, and from anyone from Turing to Einstein, Niels Bohr and so forth. And so, well, yeah, the apple falls if we're observing it to be falling, and we assume certain parameters. Equally, the apple's rising, but also the apple's above and below the tree at the same time. All of these, and also you are the apple. And people are like, what are you talking about? And it's like, well, it's just atomically the case. It depends on what we're observing, And everyone's like, no, mate, sorry, this is witchcraft.
Well, Brian Cox did that. He had that ginormous vacuum, didn't he? He dropped the feather and the ball.
Yeah.
He said, no, they're not actually falling. He says that the Earth is right. It just explained it completely, blew your brain. So
it's brilliant. It's brilliant stuff. Martin, over to you.
Well, I don't really pretend to understand any of the kind of quantum physics elements of these things. But what I
Not
do,
as anyone, mate. Not as anyone.
Yeah, which is entirely the point. But what I do like to see within these, because it plays to one of my particular loves, is that within all of this, we look at infinite possibility. And when we kind of, which is another thing I don't think we can grasp as humans, but within our minds and taking the concept of infinite possibility, it gives us the reason that we can always work towards solutions and always work towards trying to find new ideas and so on, because everything's infinitely possible. So we can work towards those sorts of things, and that's what keeps us moving along a path of being able to make new discoveries and hopefully gain more understanding as a species of the things which Brian Cox speaks.
Well said. Okay, final comment from Prashant and Richard just before we close. Prashant.
So I think I think while you guys were talking about it, I think all of this is brought to mind a particular speech from Shakespeare. So that we're going to end with that writer. The Two Gentlemen of Verona, Act 2, Scene 3. It's too long to go through over here, but you'll know why it connects to our talk. So The Two Gentlemen of Verona, Act 2, Scene 3. And I think, final thoughts. I think it's funny that, with all the vastness of reality we've discussed, there's a complete incuriosity and a complete lack of desire to seek out this vastness in our times. I think, going back to what we originally started with, I think there's because I think it's almost as though technology is just tossing out reality or information, or what, our brains are being shaped to see reality in a narrow way, sort of being battered by all the information that's been thrown at them, and restricted to just this little spot of earth that I occupy.
Yeah, absolutely right. Well said. And Richard, over to you in closing.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like you say with the astronauts, when they're in space, they look back at Earth and they see Earth as a small little ball. They get this overview effect, and they get sort of overwhelmed, and they suddenly have this epiphany. But no, I think for me, the final word would be maybe we need to stop trying to answer things and maybe we should think more about what questions we ask.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I think that's a good summary of what we've been talking about here, and the questions, as Martin mentioned right at the start, which questions are we actually asking ourselves? And to close, I mean, I was thinking about my favorite Gentleman of Verona quote as you said that, and I almost came up with my favorite, but I'm not going to Google search it. So I think Act 2, Scene 3 to me, for me, reads like consequence, especially when he is speaking around his, well, what happens then, and then this happens, and this happens. If you do this, you'll lose this, and if you do this, and you do this, and he puts his hand over his mouth. Why are you covering my mouth? He says, because if you do that, you can lose your tongue. So anyway, there's lots of parts.
For fear that thou shouldst lose thy tongue.
Exactly. So, I mean, that's all that I could remember from not reading it for 28 years, but nonetheless. So I think I'm going to end with Arthur Schopenhauer from The Wisdom of Life and Counsels and Maxims, which is a banging book in terms of, I believe, what especially every young man should learn in terms of politeness and respect for other people. And the quote is that it is a wise thing to be polite. Consequently, it's a stupid thing to be rude. And to make enemies by unnecessary and willful incivility is just as insane as proceeding to set your house on fire. For politeness is like a counter, an avidly false coin, with which it is foolish to be stingy. And so, Prashant, I'm sorry that someone was impolite to you. And I believe that if we could all, if nothing else from this take, if we miss out we'll park the quantum mechanics, we'll park the existentialism, we'll park what our version of reality is. What we could do, just to test anyone watching or listening to this for one day, is at a moment where we have a choice, which is all moments, as to whether to be polite and kind and courteous or to be rude and abrupt and reactive. Let's just for one day try the first version. Just see what happens. That's my ask.
I would like to add, though, you could be a bit curious about what sort of internal landscape this person has, or that sort of thought you could allow such a thought to cross your mind.
One could, and what I was wondering with the way we can start with internalizing and saying, I'm not in charge of his story or her story. I'm in charge of my story. Thus, my story, I'm going to try to just lean slightly more into courteous and slightly more into kind, and we could otherwise spend a great deal of time analyzing other stories, whereas in fact there is actually only one, isn't there? There's only one story, and that's the story that's in our head.
Well, I find myself doing that a lot more, actually. I had to phone up a solicitor. I had to get another solicitor in a property deal they wanted my passport and driving license certified by somebody. So I phoned up a solicitor and they said, I don't know, we can't do that for you because you're not a customer. And straight away I'm thinking, what? Hang on a minute. Why don't you just do it and then I'll become a customer, right? But their mindset was, no, we can't help you because you're not a customer. It's like, okay, I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to let it lie and say, thanks very much and walk away, But
you voted with your feet. And if you actually mentioned who that solicitor firm was on this talk, you'll then also be advertising who else should vote with their feet. However, you'll also be done for slander. So it's great that you're not doing so.
that struck me as rather a Monty Python moment, sort of.
Yeah, it is. It is. I can imagine a Monty Python sketch where that conversation happens in a continuum.
This parrot is dead.
I love it. The definition of catch-22. Okay, thank you, gents.
Thank you.
If anyone's watching this and would like to be part of a future conversation, I say this quite often. I would love more diversity on here, and I don't just mean ethnic or gender diversity or neurodiversity. I mean different people as well. I often ask. I've even DM'd literally dozens and dozens of you asking if you want to be part of a conversation. Please do get in touch with me if you do, because let's get other people in. Our standard panel is excellent, and I would like to add to that standard panel to maybe have 6 or 8 voices that can interchange as well, so that we can keep things fresh. But if enjoy this, please let your friends and family know to join the Academy of Advanced Thought. And yes, thank you, gents, as ever, to being involved, and I hope to see you on the next one.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Thanks,
Cheers,
everyone.
guys.
All right, cheers.
See ya.
Thanks.
See ya.